I want to welcome you all to our our Green Week keynote event featuring author and climate activist Harriet Shugarman. We are so pleased to have Ms. Shugarman with us earlier today in the Hopewell Valley Schools, where she engaged students at all different grade levels in challenging but hopeful conversations about climate change. Tonight's presentation will be focused on adults and how you can talk to young people in your lives and about climate change to inspire hope and action. However, before we get started in tonight's discussion, I wanted to share a little bit about Hopewell Valley's Green Week. Green Week is a series of online and in-person events that was organized by the Hopewell Valley School District Green Team around the theme of environmental challenges and solutions. We are going on our second year of programming for Green Week, and this year we are focusing on climate change. You can learn more about Green Week and other events at bit.ly/HV Green Week. Tonight's Green Week event will be moderated by two of our Hopewell Valley teachers whom I have the pleasure of introducing. We have Miss Carolyn McGrath, who is a visual arts teacher at the high school. She's also the advisor of one of the environmental clubs and the co-leader of the district's green team. She's very passionate about environment and sustainable issues, and we can thank her for bringing Miss Shugarman today to talk to our students and community. I also have the pleasure of introducing Miss Tina Overman, who is the STEM facilitator at Bear Tavern. Ms. Overman is very passionate about science and the environment. She's responsible for creating the fantastic outdoor learning space at Bear Tavern. She's also been asked to serve on nationwide committees such as 100K in 10 and the Climate Reality New Jersey chapter, where she's co-chair of one of their education programs. So Ms. McGrath and Ms. Overman, thank you for facilitating the conversation, and I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Politzis. I'm going to introduce our speaker this evening, and I just wanted to add one thing. So I am not solely responsible for Harriet Shugarman being here. I also want to acknowledge the generosity of the Hopewell Valley Education Foundation, who supported Harriet's visit for us today. Harriet Shugarman is the 2021 Water Spirit Susan Golis Awardee, a 2020 New York City Climate Hero, and a 2019 featured speaker at the Global Engagement Summit at the United Nations headquarters. Harriet is the executive director and founder of Climate Mama, and the online community launched in 2009, I was going to say 2019, 2009, that reaches individuals in over 110 countries and all 50 states. She's an influencer and connector in the climate movement. As a leader and mentor with the Climate Reality Project, Harriet established the Climate Reality New York City Metro chapter and served as its first chair. She was the recipient of the prestigious Climate Reality Alfredo's Circus Memorial Green Ring Award in 2017, and also profiled in former US Vice President Al Gore's book, An Inconvenient Sequel, Truth to Power.
And I'll take over from there. Thank you, Carolyn. Harriet's writing and thought pieces on climate solutions appear in international, national, and regional publications, and she is a regular on podcasts and radio around the country. Harriet's 2020 book, How to Talk to Your Kids About Climate Change, Turn Angst to Action, has garnered 3 national book awards. Harriet has worked for more than 25 years with governments, international organizations, and educational institutions on climate and sustainability issues as an economist, policy analyst, and educator, including 13 years with the International Monetary Fund as a representative of the IMF at the United Nations. Harriet is a professor of climate change and society Professor of Climate Change and Society and World Sustainability at Ramapo College of New Jersey, and sits on and advises numerous national boards that address climate policy, public policy, youth, gender, families, and justice. She is a senior advisor with Our Kids Climate, an international coalition of parent organizations. She lives in New York City, and it is my pleasure to turn it over to Harriet. Thank you so much for being here.
It is truly my pleasure to be here, and I got to spend all day in the district today. I'm just curious, we're not a huge group. How many of you have children or nieces, nephews in the district? Can you raise your hand if you do? I can't see everybody else. I don't know if you can raise your green hand. Okay, some. Anyways, I want to just give a shout out to these two amazing teachers that are beside me in my screen, Carolyn and Tina, and to Vicky and Nick, to everyone that I met today and that I've got to know over the past few months. And I got to meet many of the young people in the district as well. And truly, it inspires me in a way that I just want to share. I don't see this everywhere. I travel to many schools all over the country, and both just the passion of your educators, the willingness to bring subjects that are complicated and difficult, but to bring them in a way that provides opportunities for the kids to have agency, both to talk about things and to actually create action, is just something really incredibly special. So I want to just thank you again for not only inviting me, but for sharing the good work that you're doing. And I wish you continued success. We need this multiplied all over the country. So thank you. Let me just pull out my screen. I've created a slide deck that I want to share with you. All right, let's make. So hopefully you can see that. It's the cover of my book. This is me. And I want to talk about the reality of the climate crisis today. I'm not sure where everybody's background is, how much knowledge you have of where things are at. And then I want to also talk about, as was mentioned, actually talking about the climate crisis with our kids, with our family, ways to have those conversations. I want to leave time at the end for questions from all of you. I hope that you have them, and that's what we'll be doing this evening. This statement, so we're in a series of reports coming out from the International Panel on Climate Change, which is a group of hundreds of scientists from all over the world that report on a 5 to 6 year basis to the United Nations. And so it was founded in 1988. This is the 6th assessment, so only the 6th time that these reports have come out. They come out in a series of working groups. The first working group report, this is a quote from that came out this past August. And the fact that it said that in very strong terms, it's unequivocal that human influence has warmed the atmosphere, the oceans, and the planet. That we just don't hear that in those terms because, well, it's a scientific report and the science is not questioned. That there's thousands of pages to these reports. What the summary reports that come out of each of these working group reports has to be reviewed by the politicians, by the representatives of the UN. And oftentimes getting that language, it gets, you can imagine, right, with over 190 countries, very different views coming from different countries. So this was startling, even for those of us who know that and are working in the industry. And I want to share a few more of those with you as well. This is the second working group report. This is the last paragraph of the summary report over on the side, the white box, and the part in yellow. I just want to read with you. Any further delay will miss a brief and rapidly closing window of opportunity to secure a livable and sustainable future for all. Again, really stark, really direct. The report came out around the same time that the New York Times ran, I think it was a cover story about scientists who are just saying they feel fed up. They feel at a point in their careers where these climate scientists, where they're talking about the reality of what's happening, and they feel like they're just repeating it. Their warnings are getting stronger and they don't see the action following through. So I want us to start with that and then step back for a minute. And remind ourselves about the science that they've been doing, why we know that humans are causing our climate to change, and just take a look at the physics of it, because that's what it is. When I speak with my students, when I speak with groups around the country, I think that is important to remember too. There's certainly a lot of politics caught up in it. We need to take the politics out, do what we can, because the science is clear, the evidence is overwhelming, and it's truly about physics. It's about what we are doing to change the nature of our atmosphere that is then causing it to trap greenhouse gas emissions that humans are putting into the atmosphere and making our planet warmer. So let's step back for a second and look at this beautiful picture of our planet. And I'm sure many of you have seen it, or it might look familiar. It actually has a name. It's called Earthrise. And it was a photograph that was taken by the first Apollo mission that left our near Earth orbit. That was back in 1968. And it was on Christmas Eve. And it was the first time that we as humans, because at that time, right, that was a different time. There was no internet, there was no social media. There were pretty much like 3 major news networks in the United States that could beam out information to other places around the globe. And similar in this strange way to what we just experienced with COVID these past few years, the world paid attention to one thing at a time. You know, we're so living these very frenetic lives, or were, I think, until COVID, where you're distracted, you're pulled in many different directions. And at this moment, with this Apollo mission, and again, it was just happenstance. They didn't set up a camera. You know, they had cameras in this tiny Apollo capsule, and they turned back and looked as the Earth was rising. That's the surface of the moon, and the photograph was sent back to Earth, and we saw that picture of us. And where it's just everything and anything that we've known has happened throughout all history on this beautiful blue marble, this globe. And it's felt that really changed people's perceptions. And there's actually I've spoken to a number of astronauts. It's quite fascinating, actually. They have something called the overlook approach, and it's just actually to see all of the Earth and to be above it and to understand how fragile it is. And that's what happened. And so within 2 years of this photograph of our planet, we had the first Earth Day, right, which is the 52nd anniversary is tomorrow. In the United States, we established the Environmental Protection Agency. We didn't have a national agency that looked after our environment. The first Clean Air Act, and that is a body of law that we continue to use to this day, and the Clean Water Act were all established within 2 years of this photograph under a Republican president. So politics aside, it was something that really moved everyone and all of us. I had this problem this morning. I'm going to actually move us that way. I think this will work better. In any event, another picture of our planet, and this is the sun rising through the Earth's atmosphere. And Carl Sagan once described the thickness of our atmosphere is equivalent to a layer of varnish on a globe. So it's very thin. And our planet, as I talked with the elementary school children this morning, is sometimes called the Goldilocks Planet, very scientific term, right? But that's because we're the just right planet, and we have evolved many species. Everything that is our planet, that makes our planet Earth so special, has evolved on this Goldilocks planet because we're the just right temperature. And that's because of the atmosphere that allows the solar radiation that we need to warm the planet, and what we don't need then is radiated back out into space. And we stay at this toasty, since the last ice age, around 59 degrees. And unfortunately, what we're doing as we put all of this greenhouse gas pollution into the atmosphere is that we're causing that layer to thicken, and it's trapping all this heat, and our planet's getting warmer. How are we doing that? We're doing that through human created greenhouse gases. These are the many, many ways that we produce greenhouse gases from fertilization, forest burning, and fossil fuels. And we often, and you hear about a lot in present, or I assume if you're tuning in on climate discussions, about the need to transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy. And that's because a lot of this greenhouse gas pollution, we can trace back, scientists, directly to fossil fuels. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit today, but there are many other sources, as you saw from that other slide. How do we know that the planet is warming? The scientists are doing the work, they're doing the studies. We also continually, since 1977, we haven't had a year where the temperature hasn't been warmer than the average temperature of the 20th century. And we see that the warmest years have been the last 19, and the last 7 have been those hottest years on record. And I have family in British Columbia and Alberta, and my son lives in Seattle. And this last June, these heat waves were really personal to me, as I knew people that were experiencing these temperatures that had never been recorded before. And I'm not sure if it was on your radar or not, but this small rural community in Lytton, BC, in central British Columbia, and it got a lot of press because it was the hottest temperature in the world for that day. It then burned to the ground a week later from the forest fires in the region, because it was very dry in British Columbia and these extreme temperatures. So, and again, scientists are telling us, certainly we have had hot days, we have forest fires. The climate crisis is putting all of these events on steroids. It's making everything that much worse. And so our planet, our amazing blue planet, is working overtime to absorb this extra heat. Much of the excess heat that we've put into the atmosphere is trapped by the ocean. And we have forests that also pull that CO2 out of the atmosphere, but we're reaching saturation points. And in fact, when I was doing the tour today with Tina, even in elementary school, they're listing different impacts of the climate crisis and ocean acidification. How did they know that in 5th grade? That's because of the incredible teachers, I think, that we have too. But it's changing the nature of our oceans and everything that lives in it. And that's the reality that we're facing. So, we're seeing that those changes too aren't just surface temperature. We're seeing the depths of the ocean that are experiencing, again, that heat is going all the way down. So that's something scientists are telling us about, are warning us about. We're seeing impacts of the climate crisis, storms that are much more powerful. And this is a global phenomena, right? This is happening around the planet. And we're also seeing too, and this is something that, in fact, one of the high school students was talking to me about this today. The climate crisis is happening to us all. It isn't happening to us all equally. And that is something that is really important to understand. And while, things continue to accelerate and we're all feeling it, right? It's not something that we can say, when I started working on the climate crisis, when I was working at the United Nations back in the early 90s, to me, even it seemed it was something that was happening over there. I'm not sure where over there was, but it was certainly not in my neighborhood or where I lived. And it took having children for me to understand, and then doing this training that Tina spoke about with the Climate Reality Project to really grasp, hey, this is happening to everyone that I know. And I think more and more so, wherever you live in our country, it's not something that we can deny or pretend isn't happening. It's happening, it's here. And while it's impacting all of us, it's definitely having an impact on those least responsible for it the most. And that's a global phenomena. This is, again, from that second working group report that came out at the end of February. This is from the Secretary General of the United Nations. So again, it's calling out, we're not managing what's happening well. And then I'm going to get to the good part, because there are many amazing things happening. But I think part of what, and I talk about this in my book, it's really important when we talk to our children, when we talk to friends and family, we tell the truth. And part of understanding and explaining, and again, age appropriate, depending where your child is at and who you're talking to, but it's also not glossing over the facts, the reality of the crisis for ourselves, and what science is telling us, what the physics is showing us, and making sure we understand what's happening. And that comes with educating ourselves on the reality of what's happening as well. So again, we looked at fires and heat and temperatures, a lot of mudslides and landslides that are happening after an area is burned, right? There's nothing holding the ground in, and then it rains after and pours, and we have water events. So, just as that we have these big storms that get generated because moisture is being taken out of the ocean, warmer air holds more moisture, that's happening on the land too. And so that moisture gets sucked out of the ground, and that when it rains, it pours. And then instead of that water going back into the ground, and that this hydrological cycle that we all learned about, I'm not sure at what grade level, maybe is it 5th grade or 8th grade, you would be able to tell me better, Tina, but we're messing it up, because the earth it's too hard. It can't absorb that water in the same way. And so we're changing the very nature of how the planet works. We are experiencing drought. It's been over a 20-year drought in the southwestern United States. And scientists are telling us that, droughts come and go, right? But this has been made worse because of this, of climate crisis. Because of the climate crisis. And for the first time in the history of our country, a water emergency was declared on the Colorado River last August. So this is reality. This is what's happening. And we get much of our food from California. These are impacts that don't just stay where they're at. They impact us and our country and the world over. So drought, floods, I'm giving you all the book of Revelations, as Mr. Gore likes to say when he gives his presentation, but these are all the impacts of the climate crisis, right? With increased temperatures, we have increased forest fires as well. And so these are some of those extreme weather events, floods, it continues. And our area in particular, right, when we look at asset risk, is right up there in top. But these are the cities most at risk population-wise from climate. And here you see Miami, and then our Newark area. We are doing a lot. I live in New York City. I work with many of the city planners to actually build out our buffer zones around the city, to try to elevate the mechanics of the building. Sandy, we learned a lot from, but it's been taking a long time to try to build up how we're going to build our resiliency. And, New Jersey, our shoreline in New Jersey, inland too from flooding, there's a lot. We use these terms when we talk about the climate crisis mitigation, which is talking about taking the greenhouse gases, drawing them down out of the atmosphere, and also not putting them in the atmosphere in the first place. So stopping the burning of fossil fuels, that's the mitigation part. But alongside of that, it's adaptation and resiliency. So we are going to be living the climate crisis for the rest of our lives. That's a fact. It's an uncomfortable one, but it's one we have to get used to. And with that comes understanding we need to build up our resiliency as communities, as cities, states, to be able to deal with the impacts that are on the way. The impacts too, scientists tell us there's worst case, middle, and lower. So, and what they also tell us, and I shared this with the kids this morning in its very simplest terms, it's 5 sentences and 10 words. Scientists agree. It's real. It's us. It's bad. And there's hope. And that was the last working group report, in a much more scientific way, of the IPCC report that just came out on April 4th. And the timeline is short before we pass certain tipping points, but we are making progress in reducing our greenhouse gas emissions to lower temperatures from where we thought they would be even 7 years ago. So progress is being made. And what is clear from those reports, and what we know too, is that we have the technology, we have the ability to scale up to move forward on those solutions. But regardless, we're going to have to also build to withstand the storms that are here and the storms that are coming. So that requires resiliency and adaptation. We have climate refugees in the United States. We have them in other places and other lands as well. This was a quote from 2014. COVID, we're still understanding where it came from, but pandemic disease, because of our encroachment on nature, scientists have been telling us, as has the Department of Defense, these are things we need to think about, and we need to understand that that's part of that problem as well too. We have climate refugees from all around the world, and the climate crisis is a health crisis, and that is something we need to understand. How do we get over this? Like, that's a heavy, right? That's a lot of hard information, and I work with it and deal with it every day. And I have moments, and I know that you had a speaker on Monday night, I think Monday night or one night this week, that came and talked about how do we deal with that grief that we're feeling, and acknowledging it for ourselves and for our children, that it's normal, right? That's it's a heavy information. It's worrisome. It feels too big for us ourselves to get our arms around sometimes, many times. And so for our children, clearly. So how do we move from that angst to action? And part of that message is through some type of action, through whatever that is. And not everyone is going to be like one of these young people that are marching out in the streets. That doesn't work for all of us, right? We don't feel comfortable. We don't want to do that. It doesn't have to be everyone, but a lot of young people, they want to share their anger, their angst, and their emotions about this, and have been doing so very successfully over the last number of years and making their voices heard. And I've worked with a lot of young people throughout my career, and I've seen young people that have advocated for change effectively. But I think it's a combination of just where we're at with the climate crisis so far down the road, with some of the information that's come out from the scientific community to tell us this, that's motivated young people to say, hey, you've done this intergenerational injustice. You've created a future for me that seems to be my future that isn't like the one you had, and it isn't fair. And I think I also see that there's adults on the other side that are saying, well, yeah, it's a big mess. It's your future, you fix it. And that is really wrong. And when I spoke to a high school this morning, I talked with them about the adult allyship and how we need to connect. And it's an intergenerational problem we've created. There are so many intergenerational solutions. And so I think we can so much work with young people. This is just, I wanted to show you a little bit about the preface, some of the chapters of my book. And I think understanding the science and the politics, how we got there, are really critical and important parts of then being able to have those discussions with our children. Our motto at Climate Mama, and maybe these are things that your parents taught you, that you've taught your children, are tell the truth, actions speak louder than words, and don't be afraid. Simple concepts. But I think that if your 4 or 5-year-old asks you about the climate crisis, you should be thinking of it, because they might surprise you and ask you about that, of a way that you're going to talk to them about the reality of it, not the same way you talk to your 11-year-old or your 15-year-old, but in a way that answers the question that they're asking you in a truthful way. Many young people that I met, this report came out in 2018. It was a feeder report into this cycle of the 6th assessment, and it set it was called Global Warming and 1.5 degrees. And it was what happens if we hit this number, which is the threshold that was set by governments of an increase since the Industrial Revolution, of an increase in temperature of 1.5 degrees Celsius, that was a trigger point that we couldn't go beyond. Actually, they said in the Paris Accords, in the which you may have heard about, these negotiations that happen every year, but that was a big one where some of these standards were set, that we would definitely keep temperatures by mid-century below a 2-degree rise, but aspirationally 1.5. And now, even at that time, we knew that it needed to be lower. We are at a 1.2 degree rise since pre-industrial times, and we're seeing the impacts already. And so a lot of people that read this report, and a lot of young people that keyed into it, it talked about 12 years and that there were these turning points, tipping points for the planet. It didn't mean the world was going to end. The world isn't ending in 12 years, but we're just going to be dealing with increased extreme weather events and changes to our planet that we can slow down. It doesn't have to be this way. So I think that there still are young people that, and they'll ask me that, is the world ending in 10 years? And I think we have to reassure them the planet's been here for billions of years. The planet isn't going anywhere, right? It's the reality of our living situations that are going to change, that we have to adapt and be prepared for. And again, we have, do nothing and things continue in a really negative way, do a little bit or do a lot. And so it's on us, I think, to try to move that forward, that we actually do a lot. So in telling the truth, right? It's almost, we have 97% of scientists that tell us the climate change is real, it's happening, it's us. We don't have those kind of agreements in the scientific community normally. So it's happening. We shouldn't be questioning the science. We're going to, when you go to a doctor, and if 97 doctors out of 100 told you you needed a certain surgery, you're going to listen to them and do it. And we should be trusting in the science that the climate scientists are telling us. When we tell the truth, though, we must, be honest and age appropriate. We want our very young children to foster an amazing love of nature, so they care about it and they want to take care of it as they understand that it's being damaged by things we're doing, and they get outraged by it, and they should know and see opportunities and ways to take better care of nature in their own backyard, in their schoolyard. Again, I saw that today with tree plantings, with gardening, with so many wonderful ways of really getting our hands dirty, and for children to be part of the solution. And then how can you join, with others? Are there clubs at school? And there are so many clubs for these young people to join. Are there communities, is it through your house of worship, through the town green team? Are there ways? Going it alone can feel really lonely and hard, especially when you're dealing with big problems. So I think it's important to remember that individual actions do matter, because they lead us to bigger things and they move us down the road. But when we, go together, we go farther, faster. And there's many different sayings that remind us of that. And then also showing through our actions, right, that we aren't just talking about this. We really care about this. We really are walking the walk when it comes to doing things. And our kids are watching us, even our young ones, right? They're watching what we're doing around our home. They're watching what's happening in the community. And again, for yourself, we have to put in some of the, and again, everyone can just do what they can. And again, the last few years have been super hard for all of us, and for many of us harder than others. And so, I think the amazing thing I've witnessed, and what gives me hope in my many years working on the climate crisis from many different avenues, there's so many more people engaged from every aspect of it. And if you don't have the time, the energy at this moment, what you come in when you can, or we take one foot in front of the other and do what we can as we come to terms with the reality of what's happening. If we're sad and we need to feel that, we feel that, and then we have to move on to hope and resolve. And because you are probably, again, with our younger kids, or the trusted messenger, or even with your 30-year-old kid, you may know more than they do. And it's helping them understand and come to terms with what's happening as well. There was a study that came out, some colleagues of mine worked on this study. It was published in the Lancet in December, which is quite a prestigious health journal out of the UK. And it talked about climate anxiety in young people. Some of the same authors of this study are now working on a similar study only on US students. And again, it got a lot of attention and notoriety around it, not notoriety, but it just raised a lot of concerns because young people are upset. And part of the study was asking too, do they think that their government's industry is doing enough? And that was a clear no. And so by understanding that that's part of the reality as well, we can find ways, to help them move from that feeling of angst, to show them ways to move through that, to take action, to be involved at different levels, both inside our own homes, inside our community, at school, and listening to what they're doing at school. Are they learning about these issues at school? I mean, in this district, absolutely, but not in every district. And so as a parent or as a concerned member of the community, we should be asking those questions. Why isn't it? Especially in New Jersey, it's a requirement now. It's part of the curriculum. It's supposed to be taught cross-curricular K through 12. We're the only state in the nation that has a mandate to do that. It's a new mandate, but that's really exciting. And again, we need the mandate. We need funding to train and retrain teachers so they're prepared to actually present on this. And we need to supply the curriculum for them to be able to access it, because teachers are overwhelmed, overworked. I mean, and I've seen many today and I know they love their jobs, but it's a lot. And so the more that we can do to help with that too, is to help engage our children as well. And they are also trusted messengers. This is a quote I included in my book, and it was from the Secretary General of OPEC. And he said, we are hearing from our own children asking us about their future. And so there are, whoever we're talking to, we never know who we talk to, who then talks to somebody else and talks to somebody else, and the power of, individuals in their own right. I have colleagues in London, and we work with these parent groups, and there's a group of moms that have been standing outside Lloyd's of London. Lloyd's of London is an insurance company. It insures a lot of fossil fuel projects around the world. And they've engaged at the highest level. They've tried to engage the CEO of Lloyd's of London. He's a father, and they successfully have done that. And they're meeting with him next week to have a conversation. And that's awesome, and whether or not, we'll see what happens. But we need industries like that and leaders in industry to show that they can change, and then encourage others to do the same thing. These are some pictures. This is my family. My kids look a little different now, but this was at the 2014 climate march in New York City. And I hear sometimes like, oh, it's another march. Does it matter? Is it important? And I think at different times in different places, actually they do matter in terms of changing policy. This one happened in the lead up to that Paris climate conference, and it showed that people could come into the streets. This was the beginning of some of these big marches that youth then continued on. And for me, anyways, being in the streets, this is just a personal thing, with so many people that feel strongly the same way that you do, and are working to create a better future. It also just sustains me. And so I encourage you, if you have the opportunity, it can be really powerful and wonderful to go with family, to go with friends, to take your kids, to just be part of something that's, bigger than all of us in that way. These are some things that I see happening in and around New Jersey as it relates to intergeneral actions and opportunities. The Paris Agreement talks about climate education and empowerment, and there is a national group in the United States that's working on developing a framework for our education. We need, as I said before, to support our teachers. You might have investment funds, pension funds. How can we find ways, to show our kids that it matters? I'm working with a group, or I'm not working with them as much as I should, but there's a powerful group of activists in New Jersey that are working to get the state pension fund to divest from fossil fuels. I think, in fact, some of the leaders live in and around your community, and because it's invested in lost leaders in Exxon that has not been a successful investment for the last 5 years. We've seen New York City divest its pension funds, and the state as well. And so these are just some of the things we can support. And then, this final, right? Tell the truth, actions speak louder than words, don't be afraid. I think this is a tough one, right? It's a scary thing. It is, but there are many things that we can do, as I said, and as I talk about in my book. I think reminding our children to move through what they're passionate about as they look towards building careers and finding things. If we look at everything, our volunteer work, our full-time job, whatever it is, through a lens of the climate crisis, understanding what's happening, how can we then move things along? Are you a musician, a poet? Is drama your thing? How can we incorporate climate discussions or heroes into those storytelling? Storytelling is so important and so part of what we need to do. Tell our own stories. I have my students at Ramapo write their story to share with their family and friends, and because that's how we engage people more directly. So, what's your own story? We have to get involved in our democracy and keeping it going. In many different ways we can do this, and it isn't going to be successful unless we do, and encourage our children to do that too. We need to follow up and be prepared. We have to make sure that those companies, those elected officials that are promising us they're going to do things, that they really do them. And then planting seeds, those ideas in our children's mind, or listening to those ideas that they want us to hear, and then literally planting seeds and digging in the dirt. And I saw some of the amazing gardens, raised beds, and in the ground gardens, heard about garden plans at the high school. And I live in an apartment in New York City. I have a tiny little garden on my kitchen counter. I love watching as those seedlings grow, and I'm growing vegetables, and it just gives me so much joy. And so I think there's something for our children, to watch and nurture something and help it grow, that can help us sustain us all along this journey. How do we build self-efficacy, in our children? What does that look like? Success. We have to give them opportunities to succeed, and talking about many things that lead into, right? The climate crisis isn't happening in a silo, right? It's connected. I teach the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm not sure, again, if you're familiar with those, but there's 17 goals that were developed by the United Nations, launched in 2014, and they're goals to work towards by 2030. And number 13 is the climate crisis. That there's many, and they to any one of them to be successful, solving global hunger, education for all, life below water, life on land, we have to do that in a holistic way, that we take care of all of those things, so that the solutions to the climate crisis have to carry all of those things around with them as well. And I wanted to just share, I want to finish up so that we can have time for questions as well too, but this was a survey that was done by a group I work with, where we surveyed all 70,000 New York City teachers, school teachers. We got about 1,300 responses back, but it showed us that many are not teaching about climate. It was cross-curricular, and those that are teaching only a few hours over the course of the whole year. And often that's because they don't feel that they have the training or the resources. And I think that's not just in New York City, where actually it is being taught in many schools as well too, but that's a common thing. So we need assistance in the schools to help help us move forward, like people like Tina that can help incorporate into programs this understanding of how climate fits into that discussion. Again, I think we are at this moment, this great turning, where we are reminding ourselves and our kids about the importance of civics, of being involved on environmental education, of showing how, if we understand this, that we can take that understanding and move it into action. So it's really important that we allow our young people to actually have those experiences themselves too. So we need to engage them. It's not always like, watch me do this. They are watching us all the time, but we have to bring them in or have them guide us and show us the way forward too. And that even our youngest children can be involved as part of that too. I'm going to skip through some of these. Oops, sorry, I keep going back. I think what I'd like to do, if it's okay, Carolyn and Tina, I can come back to the slide deck, but it's a small group. And you can see I can talk forever as well. I am good at that. Really, there's not very many slides left there. I wanted to sort of give you the science, the pictures, but I wanted to leave opportunity for you to ask me questions. And I know that I don't know how many of you have seen it. There's a 5-minute video, if we have time, of the high school presenting to the district about their ideas behind the climate, what could be done as a guide on climate. And I'd love to share that with you too, if we have time. But I want to open it up to all of you and stop talking. So you could just raise your hand and I can call on you. I think there's a little hand at the bottom.
So Harriet, I think Tina and I were thinking of starting off the questions and giving folks some time to digest what you've said. So thank you so much. The presentation was fantastic. And, it was enriched hearing it a second time. This parent version or adult version from what we heard this morning. So thank you. So one of the things that you and I had discussed is that for a lot of folks, there's quite a big hurdle to the idea. A lot of folks would like to focus on, well, what can I do? What individual actions can I take? If I, drive this car, or I do this, or I eat less meat, and all of these things are fantastic. But a lot of folks kind of really, the hurdle of collective action is big.
Yes.
And I just wonder if you could speak to that a little bit about, the benefits of that, the benefits of, you touched on it a little bit, but what are ways that people can get involved in collective action that are perhaps less challenging for a new person?
Yeah, well, even things like if people are involved in book clubs, right? Pick a book that brings in this subject, and it can be a novel, it can be a nonfiction, and have discussions about that. And maybe you see that there's a few people there that are interested in having this, or find a partner or somebody. If this is of a concern to you and you talk to some of your friends about it, some will be receptive and others won't. And maybe you just have that kind of a support group that way too, to begin learning more about what's out there. There are so many groups, out there working on climate. It doesn't have to be that activist marching side of it. If you're a gardener, find a gardening club. And if they aren't talking about, changing, we are seeing how the levels of where you can grow things, right, have changed dramatically, even from things that we could or could not grow here in New Jersey. Bring in that discussion, so things that you're already involved in and that you care about, you don't have to find completely new groups or new people, but it's always easier to do those kind of things together And so when I talk about collective action, it doesn't mean having to be with 400,000 people in the streets of New York City or doing something like that. But it can be just, again, it's always hard to do all the research yourself. There are so many things out there. You don't have to recreate the wheel as you try to learn more or advance your actions. There are already people doing that. And maybe it's your neighbor, you didn't even know that, or your sister or your brother-in-law. And so again, I think do it through the things you're passionate about and find ways to move forward that way. I see that Cecile put in a comment about educating herself, but also finding local groups just to chat with, right? And
yes, and we do have one question also from Nick. It is a challenge to be honest with young children about climate without being too scary. So do you have any advice?
Yeah, right. Well, I think, again, when they ask us questions, I think, especially with our young children, remind them how many people are working on this big problem all over the country and all over the world. And you can point to people in your community that are working on it too. So it is a big problem, but there are many, many solutions. So I think that's also part of it is, and then how do we build their own agency and self-efficacy? How do we get them involved? Young kids have amazing ideas, right? And I talk about this in my book too, about have a family plan, right? Do you have family meetings? We used to do that when my kids were small and nothing to do with climate at the time, but just we'd sit down once a week and we'd write things in the book in a little notepad about, you know, so-and-so watched too much TV, or we were going to get outside and go for a hike or whatever, but include some ideas around climate in there, or have them include some ideas, and then, you know, give them agency to put those things into motion. Again, whether it's gardening, it's cleanups, it's getting rid of plastics in your house, right? Plastics come from oil. Use opportunities to make connections for the very young kids. If you're riding on a train or subway, talk about public transportation, why that's important, or when and if you can make those changes to appliances or a car and you move into something that's more energy efficient. Tell them why you're doing that. So there are ways to talk about the reality of what's happening. And again, you know, I think we talked about this earlier. It's happening to all of us, right? Whether you're experiencing floods and fires directly, in the next town they had a big flood, or their uncle that lives in Portland had to leave their home twice because of smoke, or they're hearing that from you. It's happening all around our country. So acknowledging the truth, but then feeding in right away. People are working on it, and solutions that are really local, especially little kids, right? They want to be involved directly in doing something right now. They're in the moment. And so giving, something that helps our planet, that helps the neighborhood, it can be also part of the story. I hope that kind of answers it, Nick.
So there's a question in the chat from Cecile. I do a lot of advocacy. I educate myself, but I'd also like to find a local group to just chat with. I find myself surrounded by family, friends, and neighbors who don't share my grief and anxiety surrounding climate change. Any ideas?
Yeah, well, Carolyn, you can answer that, right? You just had a wonderful speaker on that earlier this week for Earth Week. Do you want to share, because that's a local?
Sure. So on Tuesday, we had Blair Nelson, who leads eco-anxiety groups or eco-grief groups. There's a lot of different names that they go by. And she is affiliated with the Good Grief Network, which is actually not to be confused with the Good Grief Network in Princeton. It's a Good Grief Network is focusing on climate change emotions, and it's a national organization. And they run groups throughout the year. And I had participated in one through Water Spirit that Blair Nelson ran, was a facilitator for. And for me, it was a really wonderful experience. Primarily it is difficult to have these climate conversations in everyday conversation. I throw it in all the time. Anyone who knows me knows that I bring it up, but it is difficult because not everybody's on the same page. Not everybody is able to sit with it as much. You alluded earlier, Harriet, that it's very heavy. That's difficult for a lot of people to sit with, like the truth aspect. Some people can touch on it in bits. Some people can kind of dwell there longer. And I think there's definitely resources available. I'm happy, Cecile, to put you in contact with folks.
And Rex had a question too, right? Do you think unless Rex, you want to unmute, but so do you think we can talk to kids about population issues, overpopulation, in the context of climate and CO2? Or is this too difficult and alienating?
Yeah, no, I think, we can talk about population and how with so many people, and we have the biggest footprint, right? We don't have such a big country relative to many in the rest of the world. I think that sometimes it gets mixed up that way too. If we managed our resources, we could feed, clothe, this is what science tells us, not upwards of 7, 8, 9 billion people on our planet. And it's those of us, in the global north that, our footprint is so heavy. And so we have to figure out ways to address that too. But if everyone lived like we live in America, right? What is it? It would take 5 Earths. There's Earth Overshoot Day that keeps getting moved forward every year. From August, I think it's in July now, where we've overshot the resources of the planet, the way that we're using them. And so, we've definitely, you're absolutely right, Rex, right? The population of the planet stayed, and at a certain level, and then it's been exponential, the growth with its doubling. But again, it's also how we're living on the planet as well too. And I think that sometimes that's an important conversation to have, just as much as it is that there's many of us here. It's, the many of us that have that much bigger of a footprint than much of the world. And in fact, it's that part of, that those that do the least and have the least impact on the planet that are getting hit worst and first. So those are important points. Thanks.
And Kathy, would you like to just unmute so you have your hand raised?
Yes. Hi, and you're gonna see my cat in a second. Sorry, cat. But Harriet, thank you so much. This is really wonderful. I appreciate all your experience. So your statement that I've been listening to climate change information for over a year. I was at the Green Week last year, this one, Carolyn, which you had organized, so well done. And your statement that we will be living with this from now on, really, that really hit me hard. So I may also pursue that Good Grief group. I've heard about that before, but this is kind of I don't know, I've never thought of this, but you showed the map of the Southwest and the drought. And is there, and I hear people saying, yeah, I'm going to move to Arizona. I want to go to New Mexico, Las Vegas. I'm like, no, you can't go there. There's no water. Is there, you've had some government experience and roles. Is there any talk of limiting migration in the US? It just seems crazy to be overburdening these areas that are already, the Colorado River, right? The 40 million people it serves. Why in the world would people live there?
Yeah, I agree, and I don't know if you've been following like what's been happening in Arizona too, that, there are regulations and rules about where you can build, and that you have to, in many states, in California as well, be able to guarantee water for X number of years before you build a development. And there's it's just something I was just looking at and speaking with people about recently, Kathy. So I just bring up this one very small example, but there's a suburb outside of Scottsdale, if you know Phoenix at all. Anyways, there's a suburb called Scottsdale, and then there's this Rio Vista, I think it's called Rio Vista, that was built just outside. And they got around that regulation that you couldn't build if you couldn't supply water, because it was more than 6 houses. So they built things in chunks of 1 to 5. And it's been 15 years, but they've been getting their water from Scottsdale. There is this drought. Scottsdale has said at the end of this year, we are not, and they're trucking in water and filling up their wells. There's a few people that have their own ground wells, but those are getting less. And they're going to, and these are big, beautiful homes. They're going to stop giving the water because they need it for Scottsdale. And these people have no water sources. And the city of Phoenix, that area, they're looking at trading off what Mexico is getting from Colorado to build a desalination plant in Mexico. And again, though it uses a lot of energy, the ones that we have now, fossil fuels, to do the desalination. It isn't a done deal yet, but to then supply water to Mexico so they could draw further on the Colorado. So crazy ideas like that, things are happening, and we have to be better at managing our water and our resources, and understand that but yet we're a nation where we can't, we have our rights as individuals, and so people hold on to those fast. And a lot of the groundwater in much of the agricultural land in California is being depleted because they're growing crops that use a lot of water. And something's got to give. You're absolutely right. But one day, the tap, we saw that happen with Cape Town, right? Which is in many places in our own country too. But literally, they were counting down the days 2 years ago where the taps were not going to be turned on in most of the city. Now they had more rain, they did more on conservation, and figured out a way to manage it. We have to do that better in the Southwest. And this water emergency is real. I don't, again, there's so many things in the news that we lose sight of what's happening, but the power too that the dams, in California have generated for homes, the water level is getting so low that isn't going to happen. Those are serious things, what's happening. You're absolutely right. But I don't think we're prepared as a country to go that route and say you can't move somewhere.
Our individual rights and freedoms, which we hold so dear, and which make people great entrepreneurs and have a lot of upsides, I think it makes collective action in our country harder than in some other places. And it's
I think the more we're aware of those things, the reality of it that's happening, we have to understand that, right? We heard a lot about Flint, Michigan, right? Where I'm sure, or maybe that, if that was on your radar, right? Where the water was changed, the water source was changed for Flint, and it brought contaminated water that had lead into the community, the wealthy community, a little farther north, had the water diverted. And so it's not only, it's also, that's happening a lot too. And at the same time, we're giving companies like Nestle right next to Flint, we're basically giving water away so they can bottle it and sell it back to us or give it back to the community there. Those are wrong, right? And we have to recognize that and see those things for what they are and call them out, so they can be changed. We got to figure it out, and we can do so much better. There's a lot of waste of water, but water is a real issue.
Yeah. Well, and since you promote hope, I just want to make sure people want to check the chat. Since last year, I did start a nonprofit, and we have funds to give to high school age students. We hopefully maybe in coming years we'll expand to middle school, but right now we're starting with high school students. And if they have some ideas and they want to take it from the classroom and put it into action anywhere in New Jersey, high school students, please apply. And we have money. We'd like to get it out there and engage and give some kids hope, and adults, myself at the top of the list.
Wonderful.
Thank you again for your time and all your efforts, everyone.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So green/matters.org. Okay.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Great. And I know it is past 8, but there is one more question in the chat. How do you recommend talking to a somewhat cynical teenager who believes no small action makes any difference and that only systemic change from a massive revolution will help, and so creates a negative cloud around any of our family's eco-conscious efforts?
Yeah, I think, you know what, I think we point to some of those individuals that have made great change throughout history. Now, you know, and again, there are many amazing young people speaking on climate, and we tend to focus somewhat on just a few of them. But Greta Thunberg came from nowhere, right? In 2018, because of that report, here's this Swedish 16-year-old that sat by herself in front of her parliament building with a sign, and she galvanized a whole youth movement around the world to take action and step out. I know a number of young people like that in the climate crisis that have used their voices just to bring people together. And so I think fair enough that he or she is cynical, because it feels frustrating, right? We hear the talk, we don't see the action. But there are a lot of actions, and we can see how one person, and I think just pointing that out, there's an organization called the Alliance for Climate Education, which showcases high school youth that are taking action and that are doing things. So have a check out of that one. There's an organization, Young Voices for the Planet, that has short 5 to 7 minute videos of young people and younger than high school too, taking action and moving their communities, creating change. So I think, again, it's showing examples. I showed a film this morning, or a clip, it's a minute long, of a young girl, 11-year-old, marching in the streets of Cape Town, that, you know, where things are hard in her community, just talking about calling out people and making change. And she's created change and pulled people in her community. So young people are even those that can't vote, that aren't old enough, are making change. And we need more of those young people. We just supported through Climate Mama an organization that's called Solar for Her, and it's in Pakistan, and it provides solar power for schools for girls. And, you know, Malala, amazing. We need, who knows who's going to be that next Malala, because she can have education, because now she can have her building lit. So I think there are many ways to be able to show examples. And I think that those are good ones. The youth, that is Young Voices for the Planet.
So we don't have time for any other questions, but this has been such a wonderful discussion. And thank you again so much, Harriet, for your presentation and for the work you do, and for being here for this important conversation this evening.
Thank you for hosting it, and thank you all for being here and for the great questions. Thank you. Thank you.